Welcome to episode 1 of the SorareData podcast. I am Andrew Laird, and today's topic is the super rare myth, as we look at the importance and viability of super rare cards in Sorare's Rare Pro competitions. Sorare's Rare Pro division allows for 3 different lineup configurations, either 3 rare cards and 2 super rare cards, 4 rare cards and 1 super rare, or 5 rares and 0 super rares. The benefit to using super rare cards in Rare Pro is that they start with a 20% bonus over rare cards. So if Hans Van Aken scores 70 fantasy points, his rare card is worth 70, but his super rare is worth 84, which is just 70 times 1.2. Because of this difference, many fantasy managers prioritize super rare cards in Rare Pro competitions to theoretically maximize their scores. However, because super rare cards are not required, many fantasy managers submit lineups with 5 rares, some of which are actually just extras they didn't use in their rare competitions. In order to analyze the viability of each lineup configuration, we looked at all lineups submitted in All-Star Rare Pro over a 41 game week span to see how many lineups used 2, 1, or 0 super rares. And then we looked at the lineup configuration distribution among lineups that won rewards. Simply summarized, nearly half of all submitted lineups in All-Star Rare Pro between game week 189 and 229 included 0 super rares, but those lineups only won 12% of the available rewards. Combining 0 super rare lineups and 1 super rare lineups gives us 69.6% of the total entries, but only 27% of the rewards. The basic conclusion is that it's difficult to win cards in All-Star Rare Pro without 2 super rares. And this isn't a trend specific to All-Star, as we see similar patterns in U23, Champion Europe, and Challenger Europe. While the number of entries with 2 super rares moves from a low of 43.3% in U23 to a high of 59.6% in Champion Europe, the percentage of rewards won by 2 super rare lineups is above 80% in each, with a high of 89.5% in Champion Europe. So the basic conclusion remains: winning cards in Rare Pro is significantly easier with 2 super rares. But what if we're looking at the wrong metric? What if instead of looking at how many lineups with 0, 1, or 2 super rares won rewards, we looked at how many fantasy points were required to win those cards? Clearly in these situations, the cards that won rewards, presumably the 2 super rare lineups, scored more points than those that didn't, the 0 or 1 super rares. But instead of just comparing them to Rare Pro lineups, we also looked at the rare lineups that could have been entered in Rare Pro. There's an underlying reward safety in entering lineups in the Rare division instead of Rare Pro, because there are just more rewards available. And a lot of that comes from the availability of Tier 3 prizes, plus the E threshold, at least in the All-Star competition. However, there are actually more Tier 0 and Tier 1 rewards available in Rare Pro. For example, Game Week 224, which is representative of most game weeks in this regard, had 683 prizes in All-Star Rare, and All-Star Rare Pro only had 140. But the former had 48 Tier 0 and Tier 1 cards, while the latter had 96. This shouldn't be overly surprising, given that the main selling point of Rare Pro over Rare is that Sorare managers have access to better prizes, and the better is specifically more Tier 0 and Tier 1 cards. So while you get the opportunity to win more of those, you obviously have a significantly lower chance to win Tier 2 cards because there aren't nearly as many offered, and there's no opportunity to win Tier 3s, which make up a majority of the prizes in the Rare division, or the E threshold in All-Star. Podium scores are generally higher in Rare Pro than Rare, but you don't have to podium to win a Tier 1 reward, usually. Many people like to divide the number of rewards by the number of entries to provide some kind of reward percentage, but that really isn't a helpful factor. Using the Game Week 224 example, managers would presumably have a 4.8% chance of winning a card in All-Star Rare. That's 683 rewards from 14,204 entries, and a 6.4% chance of winning one in All-Star Rare Pro. There's only 140 cards, but only 2,196 entries. All-Star Rare gives us some interesting dynamics too, as 67% of lineups in that game week included a common card, and only 6,434 didn't have a DNP. So if you look at the lineups that didn't have DNPs, we're looking at a 10.6% chance of winning a card. But Fundamentally, we're not trying to figure out how many lineups win rewards. We're trying to figure out the best way we can win them. And with that being the case, our focus needs to be on two things. One, how many points it takes to win a reward, and two, which competition gives us the best opportunity to win them. We have the corresponding data for each of those points, so we'll start with one, focusing on All-Star Rare and Rare Pro. So we have 6 data points for each region in each game week because there are 2 competitions, Rare and Rare Pro, that offer Tier 0, Tier 1, and Tier 2 cards. And what we want to do is compare the minimum scores required to win a card from each tier and then see where those cards came from. The general belief is that you need higher scores in Rare Pro, but this isn't always the case. In fact, for Tier 0 and Tier 1 cards, it's usually not the case. So let's go back to Game Week 224 again and review the lineup configurations in All-Star Rare Pro, which shows a similar pattern to what we discussed earlier. 46% of the submitted lineups had no super rares, but those lineups only accounted for just under 13% of the rewards. On the other end, even though there were only 755 2 super rare lineups in a competition that had just under 2,200 total entries, those lineups won 108 of the 140 rewards, which is about 77%. So this certainly makes us think that you need 2 super rares to have the best opportunity to win. But remember, maybe this isn't the data we should be looking at. Instead of looking at reward-winning lineup configurations, let's look at reward-winning scores. So staying in Game Week 224, the podium scores were higher in Rare Pro, but the minimum scores required to win Tier 0, Tier 1, and Tier 2 rewards were all lower in Rare Pro. So the last spot for a Tier 0 reward in Rare needed 397 points, and there were 13 paid out. But in Rare Pro, you only needed 391 points for one of the 26 available Tier 0s. Tier 1, we saw a minimum score of 381 in Rare and 356 in Rare Pro. And then for Tier 2s, it was 352 in Rare and 344 in Rare Pro. Comparing the minimum scores needed to reach each reward tier allows us to see how 5 rare card lineups would compete for prizes against 2 super rare card lineups, regardless of where they were entered. So the scoreboard shows that there were 18 lineups in All-Star Rare that would have qualified for a Tier 0 card in All-Star Rare Pro if they had been submitted there. And obviously all of those only had rare cards. And this applies all the way down the line, as you needed 24 fewer points in Rare Pro to win a Tier 1, while only 96 lineups finished with at least 356 points in Rare Pro, which qualified for a Tier 1 reward. There were 185 in Rare that scored that many, 137 of which won Tier 2s. And then going to Tier 2, there were 140 lineups in Rare Pro that scored at least 344, which was the lowest score needed to win a Tier 2. But there were 300 lineups in Rare that scored that many, and they obviously took home Tier 3s. And while I keep going to Game Week 224, this isn't a one-week outlier. Between Game Weeks 189 and 229, which is basically August 3 through 6 through December 21-24, there were 30 instances where a higher score was required to win a Tier 0 card in Rare versus only 10 times in Rare Pro. And for Tier 1, 39 of the 41 game weeks required a higher score in the Rare-only division. Tier 2 cards favored Rare Pro, with 17 of the 41 game weeks showing lower scores there. But the selling point of Rare Pro is the ability to win more Tier 0 and Tier 1 cards. And again, you cannot win Tier 3s in Rare Pro, so the downside risk of not winning anything is higher. And this is not a trend specific to All-Star. We see the similar trends in Champion Europe, Challenger Europe, and U23. So the general takeaway here is that maybe we've been looking at the wrong data when trying to decide the viability of 0 super rare lineups in Rare Pro competitions. There is certainly increased risk of not winning anything because there aren't nearly as many rewards available and there's no ETH threshold in All-Star Rare Pro. But if we're trying to submit the most optimal lineups to help us win the best rewards, maybe we should be prioritizing our best 5 rare card lineups in Rare Pro more often. Thank you so much for listening. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it on whichever podcast platform you use and subscribe for all future episodes. If you have any feedback, either questions or comments on this episode or ideas for future ones, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Andrew M. Laird. And please also follow at SorareData so you're aware of all of our latest content.